You should be over here working.
Probably be.
Mr. Dale, let me rephrase that. You were how old when you moved to Anacostia?
4.
You were 4.
So they tell me.
So they tell you.
I
All
don't
right.
remember that.
Was Frederick Douglass still living when you moved to Anacostia?
Yeah.
Do you ever remember seeing Douglass?
Don't remember ever seeing him.
Can you tell us who built the hall, Douglass Hall, that bore his name?
Couldn't tell you who built it, no.
Any idea when it was constructed?
That was the brick building down Howard Road, wasn't it, Douglas home?
No.
Yes, Howard and Nichols
Howard
Avenue.
and Nichols Avenue, yeah.
It's across. It would have been across from the present Bethlehem Baptist
That's
Church.
right.
That's right. Yeah.
Well, that gasoline station is.
Can you tell us when it was raised, when it was torn down?
No, I'm bad on dates.
Was there any attempt on the part of the...
Excuse me, but you know, you used to have the drugstore. That's where Quarles Drugstore used to be. Dr. Gale's drugstore was.
Yeah, well, that was in this Douglas Hall
Yeah.
building she's talking about now, yeah.
Was there any concern or attempt on the part of the colored residents of the area to save that hall?
No, none that I know of.
All right. Can you tell us something of the Anacostians who have gone on to become outstanding people in their various professions?
Now, of course, you're talking about my people.
Right.
Garnet Wilkinson, to begin with, was reared in over there in Anacostia. He became the assistant superintendent of schools back years ago when we had the dual system of schools. John H. Wilson, who was noted in his day as being the greatest criminal lawyer in Washington, was born and reared in Anacostia, and he has a house there on Nichols Avenue now where his widow stays. This man, Bruce, lived on Nichols Avenue, John Bruce. He married into the Wilkinson family, and he became supervisor in the elementary schools in Washington.
Fred Patterson.
Fred Patterson was born in Anacostia.
On Elvins Road?
No. At that time, it was known there wasn't any streets cut through all in that area. At that time, it was known as Buena Vista Heights.
But it is that house with the green, yes, that you showed me, opposite the Moton School.
That is their house.
That's now Elvins Road.
It's
That's
now
where
Elvin
Fred
Road.
was born.
Yeah, that's correct.
That's where my mother
He
died.
went out from there, from Anacostia, and let me see. Who?
Moss, yes,
Moss.
he's
Oh, yeah.
listed in here as the Justice of the Peace.
Yeah,
Lawyer
well,
Moss.
yeah, that was way back there, let's say. He was the only colored lawyer in and around Anacostia, and one of the few maybe in the whole city of Washington. And he was called at one time Justice of the Peace. We had another lawyer who moved to Anacostia, and after he was grown and so forth, who they said did pretty well. That was Ricks, Lawyer Ricks. And we had a man.
He lived
We
right
had a
down
man
Buena-
on
He lived on Buena Vista.
on Elvin Road. The house is still standing near Stanton Road by the name of Craig, who was, I think, what they call a mechanical drawing teacher in the Washington school system.
Yeah, he was at Armstrong.
Yeah.
He was one of the officials at Armstrong.
One of
High
the
School.
people that we know served in Anacostia, although he's not a native of Anacostia, was Dr. Charles Wesley. Now, we know him today as a great and noted black historian. Can you tell us a little bit about his pastorate at Campbell Church?
Well, he came to Campbell possibly in 1922 as pastor, a young man, and in 1924 he started to put up the building that is there now, which, as I said to you a while ago, went through many trying days before we finally got it finished. But anyway, he started it in 1924, what we have called since the New Campbell. And
he and the men of the church got down and dug the foundation for the church.
Yeah, people in the church did that. Women folks came around and bought pig feet and chocolate and one stuff another at night, strung up electric lights all around that lot, and went that night and dug out the foundation. Yeah. So he finally, I guess you got his history. He finally went from pastor to what we call presiding elder, supervisor in the AME church. And from that, he tried a couple of times, I believe, to become a bishop. He didn't make it. He was finally appointed to Wilberforce. He ran into difficulty with the bishops and some others in authority in Wilberforce, and he quit there, and the state offered him the state side of Wilberforce, and that's where he stayed until he retired and came to Washington.
As president of Central State College, it was called.
Mr. Dale, what with your long history and knowledge of Anacostia, what in your mind are some of the most significant landmarks that we have left in our community today?
And what do you mean by landmarks?
Those kind of those buildings or churches or edifices that possibly could be signposts for the young people in Anacostia who have yet to discover the great history of that community.
Well, now, to begin with, one of them would be the Campbell Church. But what's there now?
Bethlehem, too. Bethlehem and...
well, I get around to that.
And St. John.
Neither one of them are what they were then. What I'm talking about now, if you want to call their attention to, say, for instance, if you want to call their attention to Campbell, when it first came about in that area, we have nothing except a piece of ground to show for that building. That building isn't there anymore. That's what I mean by building. See, the building that is there now was started back there.
Isn't the building in that...
Yes.
Yeah, it's in that book pertaining on that ground. That's what I'm talking about. And the same way with Bethlehem. The Bethlehem that was there back in those days that we've been talking about isn't there anymore. That was a frame building. And that's been torn down. They got a modern brick building at Bethlehem, but there was a Bethlehem church on that spot. There was a Campbell AME church on that spot that we've been talking about. But neither one of those buildings stand.
No,
see?
none of them.
Now, Norman has brought in, which I had overlooked, place that he owns on Wade Road was owned by one of those first settlers. But that building isn't there anymore. You go around and look at that house now and tell somebody that's where Moses Smith lived, and they tell you he's crazy. Well, see, he remodeled it and remodeled it and remodeled it, and about that's the old Smith homestead.
Norman's trying to say something.
Come on.
Huh? It's still there. The original framework of the house is still there.
It's all been covered over.
Up on the outside.
It's all been covered over. You put a whole lot on that. That wasn't nothing, man, but what was it, 2 rooms or 3 rooms?
What outside? You can't get this space back.
Okay, all right.
I think some of the things that maybe my sister Araminta Garner and my brother Normandale might like to remember about growing up in Anacostia. I remember as a child the Sunday school picnics that we took trolley cars, open trolley cars, to go to the zoo. Maybe they would like to tell about some recollections that they have of growing up in Anacostia. Come into the light. Take your coat off. Hurry up. Come on, man.
Go ahead.
Ask Mr. Dale about the quality of leadership and where we missed the vote today. The quality of leadership in his day. And do we still have that?
Um,
Well, you want me to get up?
No, darling, stay where you are.
Come, Aramin.
I would say we still have, in fact, we have a different type of leadership today from what we had back in those days, largely due maybe to the fact that there were very few people, men or women, back in those days that had more than an 8th grade education. And the others under them followed them better. They were sincere and dedicated, and the people followed them better than they do now, or they have done for, I would say, some years. Oh, now they brought you.
Part of that is that the community was a good bit smaller then than now. Araminta, why don't you tell them about growing up in Anacostia before we had electric lights and water?
Oh, I can remember going to the corner to get buckets of water. And I also remember that, especially in summertime, we used to let our water stay out in the yard and let the sun heat it. That's how we took our baths on Saturday afternoons. And speaking of the Sunday school picnics out at the zoo, we also used to go to Lakeland. That was a big...
Yeah.
Without being too personal, could you kind of date that?
Oh, not good on dates.
Well, I mean, some approximation. 1920, 1930.
Yes.
Yeah, it was in the 20s. It was in the 20s.
Oh, you saw all these.
During the 20s when streetcars were running out there. We used to go to Lakeland, and whenever we went to Lakeland, that was a big event.
That was in Church of Pay,
Yes,
Maryland,
in Maryland.
College Park.
Streetcars would run out there. Mm-hmm.
And one of the reasons I wanted you to bring up that business of not having water and electricity is that it seems to me that the Hillsdale Civic Association fought in those days to get some of those improvements for the people. Is that right, Dad?
Definitely so. And that was the reason this Barry Farm came into being. They were situated up on the hills there, we call it. And, of course, we didn't have it right down there near the city itself. And we were fighting to get some of it in that area. Sumner Road, Howard Road, Nichols Avenue. I recall that when John Wilson built that house, I told you about him being a great lawyer. He built that house on Nichols Avenue. He had to pay the total cost of bringing water and sewer from Sumner Road up to his house, a distance of maybe 2 blocks. He had to pay the whole cost. And then as people built, my father for one, a man named Taylor, built and hooked up with the water and sewer, they paid him back, or they paid the district, and district paid him back. But he had to put up the whole batch of money to get water up where he had built his house.
Now, Norman, tell us some of your recollections of growing up in Anacostia.
Well, I think the most outstanding thing in my mind about growing up in Anacostia was how divided the community was. In other words, we were boxed in this community at Hillsdale, and the Anacostia section was all white, and the Congress Heights section was all white. So we're in between them. And when I was real young, I just never could understand why it was that we were so unwelcome in those communities, you see.
And how the white children
And
go through our community?
Yeah, just all the time. But if we walked through any of those other communities, we had it, see. And then the pattern of jobs, the very menial jobs were all we could get in those places. And I got so hung up with the fighting for jobs in one of those places there on Nichols Avenue just during World War II. I think till this day that the reason I was inducted into the Army was because I was on picket line trying to get jobs in that store, that liquor store, get Negro clerks in that liquor store, see? Now, of course, on Nichols Avenue. And there was the picketing started with Bell's liquor store on Nichols Avenue, and then they went after Safeway stores. At that time, they were called sanitary stores.
Yeah. Would that have been at the same time United Alliance was in action, Belford Lawson? those
Yes.
black
Negro
attorneys?
Alliance.
Negro,
The
National Negro Alliance. That's
And
right.
then,
That's right.
Norman, tell
Yeah.
them also a little bit about, Mr. Smoot talks about the fact that crime was unknown out here. Tell them about our two black policemen.
Three.
Three?
Brooks,
Excuse- oh,
Wallace, and Stewart.
Yes, yeah.
Well, in our community, we had black policemen that commanded respect. Everyone respected them, and if some of the fellows were inclined not to be of themselves, or if they didn't behave themselves, they positively weren't going to lock horns with any one of these three policemen. And they had a very good understanding there in the community. Everybody knew each other, and any strangers that came in, everyone would always be able to spot them, see? And so it was practically void of any major crimes. Of course, some.
Tell them about who else was very important in sort of controlling the young people in our immediate community as the superintendent of the Sunday school. and whatnot.
Well, of course, there's no question about it. My father was a
Henry Dale.
big influence. Yeah, Henry Dale. He was known as John Henry Dale in the community, and he was a tremendous influence over the lives of not only youngsters, but with the grown-ups and parents too. And of course, back in those days, it meant something if you had influence, you were a good person and you had influence over a parent, that parent would really control the children. And so a word from him to a parent about a child that didn't do what they were supposed to do was sufficient to have that condition corrected. So he was, I think, a powerful influence in the community.
Herman, what about some of the teachers at Bernie School that you had, that Mother and Dad also had?
Well, I can remember Miss Laura Robinson and Miss Emma Smith. I think they both taught Mother and Dad.
Yeah, they did.
Wonderful people, wonderful people.
Who paid attention to us as young people?
As young people, oh, well, in that day and time, you know, the teachers really taught you. You learn differently from what they do now. I think that the basics were really taught a whole lot better than our kids are getting today.
Was there an appreciation for who you were as a people in terms of historical sense? Were you told about, well, of course you had people...
Well, we had Negro History Week. I think that was about the only time. Of course, when we had assemblies and meetings and things of that type in that day, we always sang the national Negro anthem, which you don't hear of today. Lift every voice and sing. But I very seldom hear it sung now. But at that time, every time we had an assembly or something of that sort, that was what we sang, just like the Star Spangled Banner is sung now at everything. Whenever Negroes assembled, it was lift every voice and sing. But only during Negro History Week that I can remember did we get.
I do remember that we had several people at Burney School, namely Mr. Richardson as well as Mr. Syfax, who were very much involved with your knowing about your past. And I still remember that I was told as a youngster that most of the black schools in Washington, or then they were called Negro schools in Washington, were named after the abolitionists. James G. Burney, Lucretia Mott, all those people, I grew up knowing about them. And my children who grow up in New York really don't know about them unless I tell them from home.
When you were attending the schools in Anacostia as compared to what happens in the schools today, weren't the people who were the officials of the schools, though they were segregated, didn't they come to the schools? Didn't they sit on the platform? Didn't you know who they were? And who were some of them?
Yes. Well, Dr. Bruce and Dr. Wilkinson. Well, Dr. Wilkinson was the equivalent of the superintendent of schools, and he was in charge of the 10th to 13th Division. And Dr. Bruce was supervisor of the elementary schools. And they were always in Anacostia. Any other officials of the school system in the Negro setup were in the schools in Anacostia too. They came regularly, and well, it was quite a pride in those schools. Anacostia turned out so many good students and people who made good marks in life that it was a source of pride in those schools. I was discussing this with my father just the other day, that it seems I can't reconcile this period when they don't seem to be able to teach children in school. Children are being turned out not able to read and not write good. But I can remember back there in the school system then, if you left any school in Anacostia as high as the 6th grade, you were a good writer and you could read. And I can't see an excuse for today not being able to teach them. I don't think there are hardly any children in any part of the city that can't be taught. But there's something wrong with the system today, and a lack perhaps of dedication to want to teach those children.
Where is this pride? Where is this strength? Where did it come from that you speak of in Anacostia?
Well, I think basically it came from a good rapport between the school and the home. There was always that close tie. Well, man, I'd be horrified to feel that my teacher discovered something wrong that I had done, because I knew my father was going to get it. I just knew that. You see? It was, and and in the matter of doing good things too, they worked together for that. They would have plays, cantatas, whatnot, you know, yes, they had celebrations at Maytime, you see, and it was just a proud feeling that they all had, and it was a working together. For one thing, maybe the separateness of the area had something to do with that too, because it forced you had to be more dependent upon one another for survival too. There were no jobs down there for you. The white folks didn't give you nothing down there.
Separateness, what do you mean you say separate?
Well, I mean the community itself. I spoke a little while ago about it being boxed in, Hillsdale. See, the white people were on Congress sites from St. Elizabeth's on out were white. There were no Negroes up there except those that worked for those people as servants. Anacostia was the same way. And even to the business houses, they didn't even have Negro janitors in most of them, you see. And everybody in the Negro community had to pool their resources, help one another. If some family needed something to eat, we shared what we had.
What seems to be an historical irony then is that segregation in its purest form was actually a blessing to black people.
That's possible.
The unity, it forced the working
Right,
together,
right.
cohesiveness.
And caused them to develop the skills to go out and accomplish something in the far out world.
The communities of Anacostia, you say that the people of Hillsdale banded together. I suspect the people of Barry Farms banded together, and
Yes.
the people of Stanton Town banded together. But were there any interrelationships? Were there any kind of activities or commemorations or holiday events that the people in those isolated black communities shared together? Was there anything that brought you together?
Well, at this time that I'm talking about, there there weren't too many people in the whole area, and so we practically knew. In other words, back there in those days, I knew practically everybody from the river, all the way up to where Sears is now, all through that area. I knew them. I think my sister probably knew most of the people too, but there weren't that many people up there. We separated the areas by what you might call subdivision, just by name only, but we knew everyone. And some of the people up there in those areas traveled all the way down to Nichols Avenue and were members of our church. In other words, Mr.
I was getting ready to say,
Church was the biggest social activity.
Social activity we had was Sunday school conventions,
Right.
and other types of
Camp
church
meetings. See?
camp meetings, picnics
Right.
that the churches shared with each
Yeah.
other. That's mostly we had.
So I think that about sums it up on that score. Mr. Queenan had lived right there at Marsh Road and Pomeroy Road. He was an official officer in my church, see? And several people along Marsh Road, but there weren't too many people throughout there. And I knew everybody through there all the way. And
Let me tell you this before you cut off now.
Tell about HS and the bank, and then you. That's important.
HS?
Employment.
Oh, well, I want to tell them this
All right.
this bad piece. In the early days that we have been talking about, in the early days, soon after this Anacostia or Hillsdale settlement began to fill up, the only way you could get to the city proper was to go down Nichols Avenue to Good Hope Road and cross a little wooden bridge and go over into City, Washington. You had to go down Nichols Avenue. And them crackers got after us. And they, even way back there, they got after those men who used to walk from up there in the Hillsdale area, across the bridge and over into Washington. Some of them went as far as Georgetown to get a day's work. And they'd fight them when they got down Nichols Avenue to Good Hope Road. Sometimes try to stop them from going across that bridge. That's how rotten it was back in those days. It was something, I'm telling you.
Now, bring him on down to, incidentally, Adrian Dale, who just left here, was one of the first to integrate Anacostia High School, which is itself another landmark. But Dad, tell him about the fact that the bank employed nobody until H.S. Moore went there, who was a relative of ours.
H.S. Moore went to the bank.
Cousin Hilliard was Mother's cousin.
Yeah,
And
but
he was the first employee of
I
the
didn't know
Anacostia,
he had
black
no-
employee of the Anacostia.
I didn't know you had
Wasn't he?
worked there.
Didn't he?
no,
Who
you
was
get
that?
you get your paper and put that down so
All right.
you won't forget it, Shirley.
All right, all right. Who was it then?
They organized the bank in Anacostia, the citizens down there in that section. That's what they called Anacostia, white men. Some of them had a little money, some of them had business, and they organized what they called the Anacostia Bank. And that bank, of course, it was small. It was opened on Nichols Avenue. I think the building is still there.
Yeah, it's still there.
J.C. Wood Printing Company. That's where the first Anacostia Bank was. Man by the name of Orderback was president. I got the job, I was a letter carrier, but I got the job as janitor for that little bank, and Norman and Almore used to go in there in the morning before they went to school and clean up. I'd go in there, when I got around on my route, I'd peep in there and see how things was going. And then I'd go back after they had gone to school, and I'd finish my work and see if everything was in shape. Then they decided to put up that building where they are now, the corner of Nichols and U Street. Well, I was so sure that I was going to get the job as janitor at that building that I didn't give it nobody a thought. They went ahead and put up that building. I even went so far, there was a neighbor of ours and a friend who had been charwoman in the government.